Hello, economic students. I hope you're enjoying your well-earned break. It's been too long since I've recorded a video, so I thought I'd do a little update on budgetary policy in 2024. And of course, it's very important in this particular area of the study design that you have an understanding of what's happening right now. Basically, you need to understand what happens in the current budget and the budget before that, but mostly the current budget. It's reflected in the study design from or in this dot point here where it says students need to understand the effect of the budgetary policy stance and budgetary initiatives. So that could be structural or discretionary stabilizers, depending on how it's worded, over the past 2 years. And you need to be able to link the stance and some budgetary policy initiatives to the achievement of our three macroeconomic goals or living standards. So in this video, I'm just going to unpack a couple of the current stance, some current initiatives, and talk about how we can link it to living standards or our macroeconomic goals. So first of all, let's have a look at the underlying cash balance or the budget outcome over the last couple of years. I hope you've already had a look at this, but in 2023 or 22-23, the budget was in surplus. And the most recent financial year, 23-24, the surplus got smaller. So you could say, well, the budget was becoming less contractionary. And most recently, the budget that was announced this year and the financial year that we're currently in, we're predicted to have quite a large deficit of $28 billion. So this is very clear. Is if the budget moves from surplus to deficit, we can very clearly state that that is an expansionary budget. The impact of the budget on the economy, all other things being equal, is that the economy will expand. It will grow. A couple of really interesting points here. These previous two surpluses in the previous two financial years, the government actually predicted those to be deficits as well. But because in this year and this year, the unemployment rate, and you might have done some questions on this, the unemployment rate was much lower than expected. In fact, the labor market was much stronger and the economy was much stronger than expected. And at the same time, commodity prices were much higher than the government expected. That led to increases in both income tax revenues and company tax revenues, and also less spending on welfare because people had jobs. So, little interesting thing there that the automatic stabilizers over the past 2 years actually pushed the budget into surplus. So, what does it mean for the stance? Very clearly, we're in an expansionary stance. That's great. That's nice and easy for students in the 2024 exam. I don't think there's any confusion about that. Just to take that a little step further, the reason that the budget is in deficit this financial year, or is predicted to be in deficit, is mostly due to the stage three tax cuts that all Australians have received, which would reduce government's revenue, and also extra spending by the government into the economy on renewable energy and infrastructure and energy bill relief. So we can very confidently say that, in fact, the reason the budget's moved to deficit is because of structural changes or deliberate changes by the government. So it's very clear that Jim Chalmers has actually tried to expand economic activity with this budget, which is interesting given that we're also concerned with high inflation. What a tough job it is to be treasurer. Okay, so what are some key stabilizers or key initiatives or structural changes? Now, first of all, you can pick anything you like. And I, in fact, would encourage you to pick something that you are interested in, that you will remember easily, and that you'll enjoy writing about. There's heaps of policies there that you could pick. It doesn't matter which one you choose, as long as it's real. I would say it just makes sense to me that you focus on the most recent budget. And the reason for that is, although the study design says over the past 2 years, last year's exam asked students to pick a policy from the last budget, which was interesting. I would think it would be rare that they asked you to pick a policy from the previous budget, so 2 years ago. So I think just stick to the current budget. It just saves you some mental load. So stage three tax cuts, $3.5 billion in energy bill relief, increasing in funding on infrastructure projects. All of these are probably the three easiest that I can see. These are all going to inject money into the economy and going to expand economic activity. Now, I would say it'd be helpful if you can to have two budgetary policies up your sleeve. One that is expansionary, so one that will increase aggregate demand, whoops, I can't write, sorry, and one that would be contractionary. The only policy, and I probably haven't done as deep a dive as I would have liked into the budget, but the only policy that I can find in this current budget that is going to decrease aggregate demand is the cap on international student places. So the government's basically said we're going to cap international students into Australian universities, and that would actually decrease export spending. So that's the only budgetary policy that would actually slow down the economy, which is again very interesting given inflation. The reason I think it's important to have two budgetary policies up your sleeve is you may get asked a question, and this will make more sense in a moment, that asks you to pick a stabilizer that has helped to achieve low inflation. Now, the stage three tax cuts does not help to achieve low inflation. Energy bill relief, although perhaps you could make an argument that it decreases energy prices, will not really help to achieve low inflation. More infrastructure spending will not help to achieve low inflation. The only thing that I can find is a cap on student places. So just as a little backup plan, have something that's contractionary, and let me know if you can find anything else. Okay, so how do we apply this? First, we better just do a quick review of our goals. Remember our three macroeconomic goals. These become very important in Unit 4. All the policies we learn about link back to our goals. So you've got to go back and understand the definitions. I'm just going to very quickly say that the current rate of unemployment is 4%, which means we have achieved full employment. In fact, we've overachieved it. We want 4.25%. It's still lower than that, so that's good. Strong and sustainable growth is well below the target of 3 to 3.5%. And in fact, over the last quarter, the economy only grew 0.1%. So almost nothing happened. There was almost no growth over the last quarter. So we have not achieved strong and sustainable growth. And low inflation or low and stable inflation is still it's still above target, not well above target. It's moving down, but there are still some concerns about persistently high inflation from both the Treasurer and the Governor of the RBA. So inflation's still of concern, and we haven't achieved that yet. They want it back down towards 2 to 3%. Okay, so what kind of question? How can we bring this all together? Here's a pretty standard question that you may get on your SAC or your exam. Explain how one budgetary policy initiative, and just be very clear that they can use different language here, which is a bit confusing. It could be one structural change. It could be one discretionary policy. I'm just abbreviating because I can't write, or initiative. They all mean the same thing. Pick a policy from the last budget. And what we have to do is explain how it would impact the achievement of some goal. I've got X goal here because it doesn't really matter which goal we do. The structure is the same. Let's have a look at the marking guide. So the first thing you need to do, and which is why it's important to pick a interesting policy, is to outline how the policy works. Tell us what you know about the policy that you've chosen. So if it's stage three tax cuts, well, what does that actually mean? If it's infrastructure spending, what's it on and how much is it going to be injecting into the economy? The next thing you want to do is outline its impact on aggregate demand. And I've got a bit of a three-pronged attack here. 1, 2, 3, which I think, I can't write. I need a mouse pad, which I think will help you in answering these questions. So first of all, how does the policy work? Which factor of aggregate demand does it impact? Which component, and how does it impact the overall AD? Finally, or not finally, the next thing you got to do is make some link to aggregate demand or from aggregate demand to the economy. Now, I think students often make this mistake of just going from aggregate demand straight to the goal, but there is an extra link here to be made, particularly if you want to get full marks and stand out. We bring it all together by saying the goal's been achieved, here's the definition of the goal, or it hasn't been achieved. Okay, let's look at an example. So I've chosen the stage 3 tax cuts, and you might like to pause this and have a read. And what I've really said here is that stage 3 tax cuts extend brackets. So the brackets have been extended, and they're reducing the tax rates on each of those brackets in Australia's progressive tax system. So what does that mean? Basically, everybody receives a tax cut. Everyone who's paying tax is going to pay less tax in 2024-25. What does that do to aggregate demand? Well, it's a pretty simple one, this one. It increases disposable income by definition, because disposable income is wages minus taxes, which should lead to an increase in consumption spending, and therefore, all other things being equal, an increase in total spending or an increase in aggregate demand. Now, this is where that link before, which I didn't really make too clear in the last slide, becomes important. And I should say that regardless of which goal you're trying to link to, these first two marks are exactly the same. Doesn't matter what a question you get, you set up your answer by doing these two things. Budgetary policy can have aggregate supply impacts, but in this area of study, we're just looking at the aggregate demand impacts. So these 2 marks will always be the same. We're really setting up our answer depending on the goal that we're linking to. So if it's strong and sustainable growth, we need to think about how the circular flow model works. If there's more spending, firms produce more. They respond to that increased demand by producing more. If it's low and stable inflation, then capacity constraints are placed on the economy. And maybe aggregate supply can't keep up with aggregate demand, which may create inflation. Or if it's full employment, it's really the same as strong and sustainable growth. There's an increase in production, which leads to more derived demand for labour and a decrease in the unemployment rate. Really, what we're doing here is we're drawing, it's a really bad graph because I can't seem to draw today. Aggregate demand has increased. Terrible. What has happened to growth and full employment, and what has happened to inflation? So don't be afraid to draw this graph to help you understand what's going on. And you could add more flavor to this AD link here. I'm just going through it quickly. Finally, we say, yep, this helps to achieve the goal, or no, it doesn't achieve the goal because the definition of the goal is this. And this is where having a current understanding of the economy really helps, because to stand out, you might say, well, this policy doesn't help to achieve low inflation because we're currently above the target of 2 to 3%, and this is just going to create more inflationary pressure, therefore not achieving the goal, which is. All right, just very quickly to have a look at a sample question from last year, just so you don't get thrown. In last year's exam, they said predict how one discretionary stabilizer from the most recent budget last year was likely to affect growth and living standards. So they didn't use goals, they just used growth and living standards, but it's exactly the same thing. They also said, well, predict, which I think threw a few students. Everything in economics, in macroeconomics, is a prediction, so it's the same as an explain. And here, just one more thing, it could say predict how the budgetary policy stance, which is what we looked at the start, has impacted economic growth and living standards. Whoops, stance. I'm all over the place today. Alrighty. Hopefully that helped you to understand what's happening with the budget in 2024. Bye for now.